Welcome, my friends, to another Five Nights at Freddy's theory. Thanks for tuning in, folks, because today we're going to be discussing the ever-mysterious Candy Cadet. Candy Cadet, if you aren't aware, is one of the most underappreciated characters in all of FNAF, at least in my opinion. I truly hope that when the Dead by Daylight FNAF collab rolls around, that Candy Cadet is the character that they go with for the killer. He's simply the natural option. But beyond my unlikely hopes and dreams, today we're of course going to be talking about the many stories Candy Cadet has to tell us throughout his appearances in the franchise. Candy Cadet made his first appearance in 2017's Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. He's one of the many attractions that you're able to buy from the market catalog for your very own establishment. And much like many of the other things you're able to buy in FFPS, you're able to interact with Candy Cadet as well. Usually when you talk to Candy Cadet, he'll just give you a piece of candy, pat you on the head, and send you on your way. But he does hint to there being something more if you come back to him again. But there is the random possibility of Candy Cadet telling you an actual story, one of 3 to be exact. Go figure, these stories are symbolic and are supposed to mirror something within the actual story of FNAF. But since they're so symbolic and left to our interpretation, as most things are in FNAF, it's no surprise that people have derived a bunch of different explanations and meanings for these stories. But I think I've narrowed down what these stories were actually trying to tell us. We won't just be covering Candy Cadet in FFPS either. We'll be talking about his stories in Ruin and Help Wanted 2 as well. But what makes me more right than everybody else, you ask? Because I said so. And if you have the loudest voice in the room, then you must be right. With that in mind, it's time to sit down, strap in, and get ready to listen to Candy Cadet as he tells us a story.
Candy, candy, candy.
The first of Candy Cadet's stories we'll be going over is the one about a boy who finds 5 baby kittens. The boy brought the 5 kittens into his home and kept them in a shoebox, even though he knew his pet snake might kill them. The boy thought that if he fed the snake a single kitten that it might be satisfied, but he couldn't choose which kitten to feed it. So instead, the boy left the snake's cage open before going to bed. During the night, the snake slithers out of its cage, chooses a kitten at random, and of course eats it. But after 5 nights had gone by, the boy is filled with immense regret, and decides to cut the snake open to piece the remains of the kitten back together. Then he places it back in the shoebox with the other kittens. A lot of the time, I've seen people say this mirrors what Henry and William's relationship might have been like. Specifically that the single kitten that the snake eats could be representative of Charlie, and that Henry basically thought, hey, maybe since William killed one kid, he'll be satisfied and he won't do it again. Or alternatively, it could be talking about Henry basically ignoring the fact that William killed those 5 kids. Once again, the idea would be that he hoped it would satiate his friend's bloodlust. The issue with that thought process is that if you go with the idea that the one kitten is supposed to be Charlie, why include her amongst 4 other kittens? When FNAF has something to do with 5 children, it generally tends to be about the MCI. Furthermore, if you go with the idea that the 5 kittens are supposed to be the MCI, the snake only kills one of the kittens. Not only that, but that one kitten is cut out of the snake's stomach and stitched back together. That all said, I don't think this story is referring to Henry and William. I think this story is referring to Michael and William. There's a line in the story that tells us that although the boy knew the snake was dangerous for the kittens to be around, he couldn't bring himself to get rid of the snake. Bear in mind that William is, of course, Michael's father. Not only that, but Michael is already responsible for one death in the family, that being the crying child. It's been heavily theorized that Mike was probably subservient to his father, at least to some extent. Enough that, upon his father's request, Michael willingly went down to the sister location bunker. While yes, Henry is definitely a character that feels a lot of guilt and regret, this story just doesn't quite match up with him as well as it does was Michael. The thing that hits the nail on the head for me is the line, after 5 nights had gone by, the boy was full of regrets and cut the snake open. Who else in the franchise do we know that spends 5 nights anywhere? This perfectly lines up with Sister Location, which, out of most FNAF games, actually does only last for 5 nights. Michael knew what his father had done, much like Vanessa in the FNAF movie knows her dad is the mastermind behind the murders at Freddy's. Okay, but if the boy is Michael and the snake is William, who is the kitten that the snake kills and the boy stitches together? An important theme across all of Candy Cadet's stories in FFPS is 5 things becoming one, and this story is only a slight exception. Instead of all 5 kittens dying and being stitched together, it's only 1 kitten that dies before being placed in the box with the other kittens. However, it is still 5 things in one shoebox. A lot of people say this is about the MCI, and yes, I do think it is. However, it's not about William killing the children, it's about him taking one of them and then the boy, aka Michael, helping that child return to the others. I had briefly considered the thought that the kitten could have been the crying child, especially because of the whole stitching the kitten back together thing. Although the crying child does have ties to the MCI, that comparison doesn't really work here because, again, it's 5 kittens, and the MCI had 5 victims. So it would be Elizabeth then, right? After all, she is kind of the main reason Michael goes down to Sister Location, and she is part of the eldritch entity known as Ennard. Except, that isn't entirely true. Yes, in Sister Location she is part of the amalgam that is Ennard, but she also got ejected from it between SL and FFPS. Instead, I think the kitten in question here is supposed to represent Cassidy, aka Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy is the only character in Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator with seemingly no presence in the plot. This isn't actually very surprising when you consider the fact that the last time we physically saw Golden Freddy was in FNAF 4 via Nightmare Fredbear. But then again, that's a nightmare. Okay then, what about FNAF 3? FNAF 3 is theorized to take place closer to FNAF 6, but even in that we only see Golden Freddy and Cassidy in sprite form. The last time we actually physically saw Golden Freddy was FNAF 2, and even that's a bit shaky to even say because in that game bro fades in and out of existence and literally jump scares you as a giant floating head. That all to say, Golden Freddy is a very paranormal thing that has always been tied to the other victims of the MCI in a very close way. In the 4th closet, we don't actually see Golden Freddy as being physically part of the creature Afton has created out of the original animatronics, but we're told he is there, and we even see Michael Brooks there with the other children in that weird dreamscape thing that Carlton enters. My long-winded point here is that when Ennard was formed in Sister Location, it brought all of the MCI together. This is working under the idea that Afton melted down the metal of the classics in order to make the Funtime animatronics, and so the soul juice, aka Remnant, was split across the Funtimes. Now that they're together though, Cassidy is able to join them. I'd say she did so probably after Elizabeth got booted out, and I'd also say the whole stitched together thing is symbolic for what Ennard eventually becomes. Most likely, Golden Freddy could have been dismantled by Afton during the FNAF 3 minigames, and that's why Cassidy appears as a ghost instead. With that thought in mind, Molten Freddy is basically the evolution of the MCI. They are brought together in the most literal way possible, and that's thanks to what happens at the end of Sister Location. So to sum all of that up, this story is about William and Michael. It's about Michael feeling regret over neglecting the crimes of his father, and it's about all 5 victims of the MCI, including Cassidy, being part of Molten Freddy. The next story Candy Cadet has for us is the story of a man who adopts 5 orphans. The man would often visit these orphans, bringing them toys and gladness. But he feared that someone would break into the houses that the 5 children lived in, so he adopted them and brought them all to his home. He promised to never leave them, and they promised to always come home and never stay out too late. But one day when he left to buy food, a burglar snuck into the house and killed all 5 children. The man could only afford one coffin, so he stitched together the bodies of all 5 kids to make one child that he proceeded to bury. That night, there was a knock at the door. Right off the bat, this one is clearly about the MCI. The burglar is clearly William Afton, and the man that adopted the children is most definitely Henry. I feel like this one is more fitting for Henry because bringing all the children into one place is literally what FNAF 6 is all about. Henry devises a plan to bring all the remaining active characters in the story under one roof in order to finish things off once and for all. More particularly, his goal is to finally set those trapped souls free so that they can finally move on. I want to point to that last line in the story. That night, there was a knock at the door. There's actually an interesting line from Molten Freddy that I think seals the deal here.
Knock, knock! I'm here!
Out of the 3 stories Candy Cadet tells us in this game, this one feels like the most straightforward in my opinion. The coffin in this case is representative of the labyrinth, and while I know you could make an argument for the man being Michael symbolism, there's a few reasons why he doesn't fit the criteria. The man promises that he'd never leave the children, which doesn't really make sense if it's Michael. Yes, Michael feels a lot of regret for what he did and his own inaction, but he also does leave the children. When he gets fired from FNAF 1 after night 7, it's not like he just shows back up next week. Meanwhile, you have Henry, who of course was the co-founder of the entire brand. Besides William, who we already established as the burglar, Henry was the guy who built these robots. Now, no, I don't think Henry was having tea parties with Freddy and the band every Saturday, but have you ever wondered why the classics are even still around after FNAF 1 closes? The simple answer would be that the company simply left them to rot. But then again, when FNAF 2's location closed, they had no problem scrapping the toy animatronics. What I'm thinking is that Henry left the classic animatronics in one piece because he knew they were haunted and didn't know what to do to help them. At the very least, he could let them live in peace in this run-down decrepit pizzeria. Not only that, it's a building that he owns, which is how he's allowed to let them stay there without being disturbed. That is, until a certain purple burglar sneaks in and takes everything those poor children have again. Our third story is about a woman trapped in a small room. The room contained a furnace and five keys, with each key being able to unlock 5 doors outside the woman's room. Within each room was a child that she could choose to flee the building with. However, she could only take a single key out of the room she was in. Desperate to save all 5 children, she melted all 5 of the keys together in the furnace in order to create a single key that she hoped would unlock all 5 doors. Unfortunately, this did not work, and now none of the children could be saved. Rather than leaving her room with a key to 1 life, she had taken with her the key to 5 deaths. This story is probably the hardest to find a solution for because there's no clear antagonist that would be representative of Afton. Instead, I think the woman in this story is the puppet or Charlotte, whichever you prefer. The 5 children are the MCI, of course, and the 5 keys are actually in reference to the Happiest Day minigames from FNAF 3. In total, you play 6 different minigames in order to accomplish Happiest Day, one of which is the Happiest Day minigame itself. Completing the other 5 minigames is how you actually bring the other spirits together for that final party. The sprites that you play as in those minigames all tie back to the crying child. They are the fragments of his memory, whereas the children themselves each carry a piece of the crying child's soul. I know that's a big claim. I would give context to that. However, I've already done so countless times before. Hopefully you know the drill by now. The hope would be that bringing all the pieces of the crying child's memory together would in turn help him find his way to freedom. With the crying child freed, then the pieces of his soul that the other children carry would be gone as well, and therefore they would be freed too, right? I think once upon a time this was when the children were freed, but then Scott decided to continue the franchise and that stopped being the case pretty quickly. Happiest Day might have freed the crying child, and maybe it was even a stepping stone in the right direction to freeing the others, but ultimately it did not have the intended effect that Charlotte was probably hoping for. So to paint a clear picture and tie this back to Candy Cadet's story, the young woman represents the puppet, the children are the MCI, and the 5 keys are stand-ins for the fragments of the crying child's memory, i.e. the sprites from FNAF 3's secret minigames. Moving on from FFPS finally, we shift to Security Breach Ruin. This story is about a mother and a little boy who lived alone in a cabin in the woods. There was a monster that lurked in the woods, but the mother caught it and kept it locked in the basement. Still, the monster made scary noises at night that scared the child, but the mother would comfort her son and reassure him that the monster couldn't get out. Then she would sing him to sleep with a lullaby. One night, however, the monster stopped growling and instead listened and learned the lullaby. The next day, when the mother went out to find food, the monster sang the lullaby from the basement. The little boy heard the lullaby and opened the door. I don't think people would disagree with me when I say that the monster is clearly supposed to represent the mimic. Now, as for the mother and boy, that's a little bit more iffy. Most people would say that the little boy in this case is Cassie, and that the mother who trapped the monster in the basement is Gregory. And you know what? Those people would be absolutely correct. I mean, it just makes the most sense, right? Yeah, it's a bit weird that Gregory is the mother and Cassie is the boy, compared to the previous stories Candy Cadet had for us, where the parallels were a little bit more cohesive, for a word anyway. But generally speaking, this story perfectly lines up with the events of Ruin. The mimic was able to copy Gregory's voice after hearing it in the main game, then use that voice to lure Cassie back to the Pizzaplex. And then the mimic tricks Cassie into helping it escape by deactivating the security nodes. Oh, and, you know, we literally find the mimic in the basement of the Pizzaplex. Or at least some sort of basement anyway. You get the point. Next, we come to Help Wanted 2. This story is about a family that missed the most important opportunity of their lives. That being a limited time offer that included a family-style pizza with all their favorite toppings. This wonderful deal was only $49.99 while supplies lasted. But the family did not purchase the food and they all died. This is probably the most simple Candy Cadet story he's ever told. It's very disconnected from any events happening within the current era of FNAF, and I think that's because Help Wanted 2 went a long way to course correct the story. It's no secret that there were a lot of mistakes with Security Breach, and it led to a lot of people getting the wrong idea. For example, a lot of people thought William Afton was back from the grave. To be fair, at the time there wasn't an entire book series setting up the Mimic as the new big bad villain. When you see Burntrap emerging from a recharge station as purple smoke spews out, yeah, it's not the wildest thing ever to wonder if that's Afton coming back once again. But with the death of Glitchtrap at the end of Help Wanted 2, the Tiger Plush tease, and Edwin's Factory, oh, and the fact that we're getting a game literally called Secret of the Mimic soon, I think this Candy Cadet story simply exists to tell us, yes, the Afton family is gone and dead. It is just reinforcement for what Scott originally intended when he thought up the Mimic. It's just unfortunate he didn't tell Steel Wool Studios that when they were making Security Breach. Finally, we come to Candy Cadet's final story. This tale follows a young woman who, when she was little, was led into a dark forest by a witch that almost ate her. She had fallen for the creature's fox friendliness, but thankfully she had escaped before being trapped in the witch's oven. However, this near-death experience left the woman scarred. When she was grown, the woman sought revenge on the witch and decided to enter the forest willingly. She was greeted at the mouth of the forest by a young boy who offered to help guide her through the darkness. The woman followed the young boy to a small house, where he told her to rest before killing the witch. The young woman was tired, so she decided that she'd kill the witch in the morning. But when she followed the boy into the house, the oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal. Right off the bat, there's a few things that come to mind. The woman makes me think of Vanessa, and how she might have been scarred after being under Glitchtrap's control. In that case, the young boy could be Gregory, and obviously the witch is Glitchtrap / the Mimic. But we see Vanessa freed from Glitchtrap's control at the end of Security Breach's Princess Quest ending, which is the ending most people would say is most likely canon, and Ruin supports this. Also, why would Gregory still be under Glitchtrap's control after Security Breach? If we're acting working under the assumption that genders of characters don't necessarily have to directly correlate to characters within these symbolic stories, then I think the woman here is actually Help Wanted 2's protagonist. Not only that, but I think Help Wanted 2's protagonist is Jeremy from Help Wanted 1. It's never actually specified that Jeremy died, just that he probably cut his own face off, which does fit the whole she was scarred for the rest of her life thing. One of the cut lines that is believed to belong to Vanessa or Vanny is, "You have a chance to end it. You are the last. It kept you for a reason." Truly, FNAF can't stop underutilizing this poor character. Still, Candy Cadet's story here follows the plot of Help Wanted 2 pretty closely. Jeremy, aka Cassie's dad, and the Bonnie bully from FNAF 4, returns to Freddy's to finish off Glitchtrap once and for all. However, Glitchtrap actually tricks Jeremy into helping him, as we see in Help Wanted's first ending, where we see Maskbot give Cassie the Vanny mask in Ruin, which in turn ultimately leads to the Mimic's escape, as we see in that DLC. Although we do destroy Glitchtrap in Help Wanted 2 after that first ending, Cassie's dad still ends up dead, or at least trapped in this VR space. For all intents and purposes, the witch did have its meal. The mistake I think some people make here is thinking that the boy and the witch are two separate things. The boy is the witch, a disguise that the witch wore in order to lure the young woman into the oven. Now, as to who the Mimic might be actually copying here, it might be a bit of an odd pick, but I think it's Helpy. Throughout Help Wanted 2, we see slides that urge us to open the gift boxes that we gradually unlock as we progress through the game. Both this game and Ruin hint that Helpy is most likely an extension of the Mimic program, much like how Glitchtrap is. And again, Helpy is what urges us to open the presents that contain the memories Glitchtrap is tied to. Admittedly, I would be open to another answer, but to me, Helpy makes the most sense here. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this theory, and if you have any thoughts, opinions, or takes of your own that you'd want to voice, feel free to do so in the comments below. Also, if you're feeling generous, I wouldn't mind a like and a subscribe, but I'm also not picky. Make sure to check out my Fazbear Frights breakdowns too. I recently started doing those, and I've been really enjoying doing them, so I definitely would appreciate the support. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day or a good night, whichever it is for you. With all that out of the way, I will see you all next time. Peace out. But after 5 nights had gone by, the boy is filled with immense regret. And sorry, I went to read the script to record the line, but I realized I accidentally spelled snake as snack. So I was about to say, and decides to cut the snack open to piece the remains of the snake back together. The snake, oh my god, I totally okay.